Today's talk is called Becoming Available. Now, before we get into the text today, which is, the notes are in the free YouVersion Bible app in the events section. I remember being 16 and 17 years old and getting so many serious talks from our high school guidance counselor. It was imperative that we got our college applications in early because it's very competitive. And I grew up in Florida, so you needed to choose, or just apply to all of them. University of Florida, Florida State University, University of Central Florida, University of South Florida. We didn't do Miami or anything in South Florida because we were Central Florida. We were way better. So anyways, I've repented of that. I thought, oh my goodness, if I don't get into one of these schools, the narrative I heard is if I don't get into one of those schools, my life is over. And my pastor, Rob Koch, when I was in Austin, Texas, he used to say he graduated in the part of the class that made the top half possible. I know another guy like that, but that was Pastor Rob's story. Flash forward a couple years, Marie and I were teaching English as missionaries, teaching English in Japan in middle school. So it's Ichinensei, Ninensei, and Sannensei, first grade, second grade, and third grade for Japanese middle school, and in Sannensei. So it would be about the equivalent of ninth graders, 15-year-olds in the U.S. You take a test. And this test determines what high school you go to. What high school you go to determines the college you can go to. It's much more, it's different. I can't even explain it. I only know the top layer to it. I just witnessed with my eyes over the course, and it's this time of year that they're preparing for it, getting ready to take it. It's actually around February. One of my students, his hair went gray. As a 15-year-old, so much stress because everything rides on this test. And only the cream of the crop are accepted into the good high school. Only the cream of the crop. And so as an outsider, I'm a guest in that culture. I just thought, oh my goodness, this is so wild. It's so different. And we have similar things, but my goodness, there's this thing baked into so many different cultures that say, if I don't make the mark by this age, then my life is over. I went to high school with a guy who was fascinated with Alexander the Great. And he said, well, if I'm not a millionaire by the time I'm 30, I just want to die. That's like a wise 17-year-old. It's like, oh, that's a pretty high bar there, buddy. And we live in this world where so much is built on what we do. So much is built on how well we do it. Men, we know nothing about this, right? None of us define us by our job. No guys define themselves by how much is in their bank account. Well, we've graduated from that. We let the women worry about that, right? So many of us think that we have to perform to make the cut. And before we get to our text, I want to give you some biblical background, especially about first century Palestine. And for a Jewish boy especially, you would study. And as a Jewish boy, you would memorize the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. You know it. They didn't have chapter and number verses back then, but they knew it. And their mind could hyperlink. There's, especially in the Hebrew prophets, there's all these phrases and turns of phrase that will hyperlink back to, especially Genesis. New Testament writers with a Jewish background do this a lot too. The Apostle Paul, Peter, John, so many, because their minds, they didn't have Netflix, so they could memorize Bible verses. It's amazing, right? So, if you want to be the best of the best, in the first century, and you are a Jewish boy, you memorize that Torah, and there's a rabbi that teaches in your local synagogue. You follow that rabbi around, you read, you study, and in Jewish culture, the more questions, especially then, from what I've learned from Dr. Ray Vanderlaan, He has this website called followtherabbi.com. It's amazing. It's a fire hose of all the fun Jewish stuff. So, you follow this rabbi around, and after you've studied, after you've done extra credit, after you've made all A+, when you're about 12 years old, you approach the rabbi and you say, do I have what it takes to follow you? And then, if you are the cream of the crop and you've risen to the top like a House of Pain song, if you are the best of the best, the rabbi will say, come follow me. And then you can follow him. And in that culture, it wasn't about information transfer as much as you wanted to become like your rabbi. There's accounts where they would actually, some disciples, and the closest English word we have to the equivalent is apprentice, because it's wanting to become like your rabbi so much, some of these disciples would follow in the footsteps of their rabbi. Some would follow their rabbi to the restroom or the bush or wherever, just in case the rabbi said a prayer. I don't know, maybe it was after a bad meal. I don't know exactly why the rabbi would be praying then, but that's how closely these young boys, usually about 12 years old, would follow them. And if you didn't have what it takes, you'd have to go to your backup plan. Anyone ever have a backup school? You know, I didn't make it into I didn't apply to the University of Florida or any of those, because I found in my high school guidance counselor's office, I found a cassette tape, a VHS cassette tape. This is back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And I found out about Oral Roberts University. And their application question, the first question was, do you have a pulse? And I thought, that's the school for me. Okay. I'm exaggerating a little bit. But, so here we are in Mark chapter 1 today. Interesting that today we're in the book of Mark. Hi, Mark. And most scholars say that Mark was dictated by the Apostle Peter, who's a real action-oriented guy, the guy born with a foot-shaped mouth. I love Mark because it's full of action words, and it just gets right to the chase. It's like, okay, here's John the Baptist and the birth of Jesus, and now Jesus is calling his disciples. So he's walking along the shore where a lot of the rabbinical rejects were. Because the backup plan, if you aren't training to be a rabbi, you become a fisherman. Or you sell out and become a tax collector and take advantage of your own people at the expense of the foreign oppressors. Or you become a tekton. That's Greek for day laborer, worker, not just carpenter, because they're in the Middle East. There's not a ton of wood, so it's not just carpentry. Jesus was a tekton. So you call those folks too. And here he is calling, sees a couple of boys, maybe teenagers, walks up to these fishermen on the Lake of Galilee. And in Mark chapter 1, real simple message today. Jesus says, come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And then they posted on social media about it. They went and saw their therapist and asked if it would be a good idea if they left their day job to go back into rabbinical Bible school. Nope. This is Peter. There's no time for that. This is the book of Mark. At once, they left their nets and followed him. So, for those of us taking notes, point number 1, did you notice who he asked? Jesus went up to the scholars, right? No, Jesus doesn't call this is a little old school. He doesn't call the qualified. He what? He qualifies the called. The good news for those of us who put our identity in what we do is we're going to fail at that. And we will be very disappointed. And Jesus will nudge us towards putting our identity in who he says you and I are. He doesn't call the qualified. He didn't go to the best of the best. He didn't go to the scholars. All of those things are great. Education is wonderful. Please don't hear me say don't be educated. Is that even correct grammar? I don't know. And this little verse is packed. He doesn't call only the qualified. He is the one who qualifies the called. They were qualified because Jesus asked them to follow him. When we're following Jesus, one of my favorite, he's mentored me through his books. I've never met him. His name's Eugene Peterson. I love his quote. Following Jesus is a long obedience in the same direction. This is countercultural. In America, we don't like anything that takes a long time, and we don't like obedience, right? Don't tell me what to do. I got my rights. America. No, we're going to follow Jesus. It's not going to be microwave. It's not going to be DoorDash. But thank God for microwaves and DoorDash, right? Okay, let's be real. Those aren't bad. We must watch how these things in our culture shape our perception of time. We must be very careful about the things in our culture and how it shapes our perspective of who's really in charge and what independence really means. We're free from sin, but when we follow Jesus, our response to Jesus' grace is to obey. Obey, even if it feels like it's a long walk in the same direction. And for those of you saying, are we there yet? There's hope. There's hope for you. Jesus can speak to you even in those are we there yet moments. Scripture promises that God will give us an unreasonable peace, even if it feels like you've been in the back seat for decades and we're still not there. Following Jesus, it's a long obedience in the same direction. So Jesus walks up to these disciples. Come follow me. And it says immediately they followed him. Number 2 is immediate obedience changes lives. Mark, it says at once. It's like really strong. At once they followed him. So, a couple things here. When you follow Jesus, and this one hurts. This one hurts. If anyone's wondering, I'm not thinking about you. This is all about me. Following Jesus, it includes you too, means we are interruptible. God is far less concerned with your to-do list than you would like God to be. God sometimes doesn't care about my to-do list and my agenda. He probably looks at that and goes, oh, isn't that sweet? Here's what you're really going to do. God looks at my plan. So many times in November and December, something would happen and I would think, oh, that sounds like a problem for 2026. But it's a problem for 2025. God looks at that and says, oh, that's so cute. Or life just throws us a curveball. But these guys, they were interruptible. They had plan. And I think sometimes we got to give God something to work with. I think it's really awesome that they didn't just give up. Like, okay, we didn't get into rabbinical school. Okay, we'll go into the family business. We'll stay busy. And then in that, God says, oh, good job. That's usually how God works. Some people think God's will is like this tightrope, and that if you miss a decision, God's like, I can't use them anymore. That moved to Peoria 10 years ago. You're done. A little Illinois humor for you. I had an uncle that lived there. Anyways, so people think like if you just make it like it's this real tightrope, what if the stuff God wants is more like a rushing river? And so many choices in life are like, which one are you going to do? Sometimes, though, Jesus walks up to you and says, follow me now. And it's a situation that we're working on in the Collins house. Follow through first, debrief later. We need to write that on our refrigerator. Follow through first, those of you who have young children. Follow through first, debrief later. And all the moms and dads said, yes, amen. means we're interruptible. And I love, especially when I was a youth pastor, I would love when teenagers would come to Jesus for the first time. And I think a lot of times, those of us who are more seasoned, more wiser, it's not our first rodeo when it comes to following Jesus. We hear the enthusiasm of a new believer, and we're like, oh, that's so cute. And accidentally, we throw a little bit of water on their fire. Like, oh, they're enthusiastic now, but give it a few years. Oh, they're enthusiastic now, but wait till some people at the church tick them off and they get hurt by the church. So we kind of want to cocoon them. Or when they come to us with these, I think God is telling me to do this now. And then we're like, well, let me tell you how sharing Jesus really works. Here's my thing. And sometimes I think we just need to let their obedience and that impulse, like to cheer them on. Because more often than not, when we cheer on new believers and they just want to obey what it says, they're going to figure out a lot of stuff. And actually, if we watch and we're there side by side, we actually wind up learning a lot. Immediate obedience. It changes lives. And this is something that can be so beautiful and not heavy. Obedience almost seems like, it's not a bad word, but it feels like when I say it, there may be some of you, because of your church background, that go, oh, there's a little flag that goes up. That's obedience. Well, hold on a second. We're free. It was for freedom that Christ set us free. I can do whatever I want. Hold on with that obedience word. But I think as we are in the vine, as we are connected to Jesus, this obedience word actually frees us if we really think about it. I've talked about the image when it comes to following the narrow way of Jesus. A lot of you will remember, so many generations, remember the science fiction show Doctor Who? The spaceship, the TARDIS. It's a telephone booth. And it's a running gag. I think the show's been on 60 years now or something like that. Anytime someone goes inside the spaceship, they're like, wait a minute. And they're all English, so it sounds really cool. It's much bigger on the inside. It's the running gag. I think obeying Jesus and his narrow path, when you're on it, from the outside it looks, whoa. From the outside, my teenage perspective was following Jesus means you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't watch this, you don't say that, don't. But when you start following Jesus and you've experienced the love and grace of Jesus, it's not a tightrope anymore, and you think, whoa, this is a lot bigger on the inside. I think in that moment, when Jesus walked up to these brothers, imagine, God incarnate, and they didn't know that, and I think part of the purpose of Mark shows how much the disciples didn't get it at first. There's this movement from, oh, there's something about this guy. Like there's this charismatic kind of leadership thing. Okay, I'll follow this rabbi. Whoa, he can do miracles. Whoa, he's saying what? Whoa. And the arc is, whoa, he is the Son of God. There's a lot of hope in us. Because a lot of us, the immediate obedience that changes lives, that if that was a tightrope, a lot of us would have fallen off a long time ago. But luckily, there's a big net. One of the founders of our stream of Christianity, his name's Menno Simmons. The word Mennonite and that tribe of Christians comes from him, and he says, true evangelical faith cannot lie dormant. So there's something about these disciples hearing Jesus, and they immediately left their nets and followed him, because following Jesus isn't merely about what you believe. That's a very important concept. It's a very important thing for us to believe the right things. Of course, that's a journey. Jesus doesn't want to stay head knowledge. Jesus doesn't want us to just walk around like heads on a stick. We have hands, too. We have hearts for compassion and empathy and for loving our neighbors. We have feet to go and tell the world. True evangelical faith, it can't lie dormant. When you experience the love of God, which I believe these guys did, Jesus was saying, come follow me. It's like, boom, you do it. you go. Why? Point number 3, because availability creates room for divine appointments. And I don't just mean when you're at Victoria Gardens and the parking spot right in front of the restaurant opens up. Some of us are like, I got the favor of the Lord. It's a divine appointment, brother. I think God, of course, God cares about that, and pray to God about everything. But also, availability creates room for these divine appointments. You might become someone else's miracle. Like some of you, this isn't my notes or anything, we just sang and prayed worship songs. I think when we engage in that, even though a lot of us would be like, I really should only be singing in the shower. I can't believe Pastor Marie tells us all to sing. She doesn't really mean me. Or I think back so many times to when I was a teenager, and we were at this church that wanted to be on fire for Jesus, but we were still super Methodist. So people would be like, what's happening to my hand? Be respectable. I remember being a teenager going, what would happen if I raised my hands? Oh, it's too embarrassing. But then, some of the older teenagers, we all sat together. It's a couple days where my friend Jimmy closed his eyes and started worshiping his hand. And for some reason, that gave me permission. I wanted to be that courageous person, and it's a little deal, but it wasn't. Because his obedience to Jesus is actually what set me free that day. I was like, oh my goodness, yeah, of course, yeah, no one's making fun of him. No one's looking around. And I engage, and for some reason, when I opened my hands like that, it was like my body was telling my soul, we're surrendering to Jesus in this moment. And then my mind, it was like a reverse thing. And God really ministered to my heart. And it was also good training because I spent so many years as a middle school youth pastor when I was in front and no one else was engaged in music. I mean, I don't know what I learned not to look back at the middle schoolers during worship. It's good. But we talk about that. When you obey Jesus, whether it's in the walls of the church or outside the walls of the church, it creates opportunities for people to be set free. It creates opportunities for other people to rub shoulders with Jesus because Jesus lives inside of you, because you are a portable temple everywhere you go. So, a couple of application questions just for you. You don't have to write them down. They're not public. Just in your own walk with Jesus, where in your life have you said, maybe later? And there's a difference. You know when this is something you need to do now. And then there's other times where you need to pray about it for sure. But where if you were really honest, have you been holding back? You know, I love my kids. I have teenagers, and some of the conversations we have are just like, these are my kids. We like to talk about the geopolitical implications of Constantinian rule over the Roman Empire. Like you do. These girls are so smart. And we were talking about this Emperor Constantine, who is the one who decreed, okay, it's not illegal in the Roman Empire, it's okay to be Christian, we're going to switch. And it is mostly because of his praying mama. So moms who pray, please keep praying. But Constantine, he knew a thing or two about Christianity. So he waited to get baptized because he was like, hey, I don't want to get baptized and then mess up. I want to have my fun. And he waited to be baptized. He wasn't a Christian, as historical records say, until the very end, on his deathbed. So hopefully we aren't as exaggerated as that. That's a really long time to say, maybe I'll get there, Jesus. Where in your life have you said maybe later to Jesus? So if that is an area, ask God for ways that you can create margin in your life so you can follow Jesus. What if our church became known for our availability. To be interrupted. I love, sometimes I do have to close my office door. Sometimes. But sometimes when people drop by and they really need something, I thought, am I available? And when someone pops into my office, I like to say, why did God bring you here? That really cuts through. If people are just wanting to chit-chat, they're like, I don't know, see you later. But I'm open. What's God doing? What if we were known for that, not just in the walls of the church, but available? In our busy culture, there's always somewhere to be. There's always a ton of stuff to do. I think this is one of the ways you and I can live prophetically, like revealing God's heart to the community around us as if we weren't stressed out all the time and unavailable. It's one of my personal core values that's almost embarrassing to say, and I invite you to adopt this one for yourself. I am unbusy. Feels weird, right? This is on YouTube. Doesn't mean that you're lazy. It just means you have priorities and you're available to say the best yes, to give your best yes. What is Jesus asking us to do? Are we available to be on God's agenda? What if we became the kind of church that was willing to drop our nets and follow where God is leading? That's a tough one. That's the invitation today. The invitation maybe for you, maybe you've never given control of your life to Jesus. Maybe at one time you were following Jesus, but you've picked your own agenda back up. I hope that today you would surrender your life to Jesus, and it's not a formula that you have to do. It's not some secret words. It's very simple. Scriptures say that when you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, you will be saved. You can pray a simple prayer. You don't have to repeat after me, but you could just say, Jesus, I say yes to you today. Help me to loosen my grip on what holds me back and help me to follow you fully. It can be that simple. But remember, we are all invited to follow Jesus, and he's asking you today, will you follow me? And Jesus doesn't just call the qualified, he calls and he qualifies the called. God does more with people who are available than he does with people who are impressive. God does more with people who are available than with people who are impressive. You have a fancy degree? Awesome. Good for you. You able to do amazing things that are really public? Awesome. We need everybody. If you're sitting there going, I don't have the degree, I don't have the education, I don't have the talent, I can't sing, I can't play the bass like rock and roll Jim Delanive, I can't do all the things up front, I don't have the leadership gifts or this or that, then you are the one Jesus is especially saying, come follow me. I got plans for you, kid. I can work with that. God does more with people who are available than he does with people who are impressive.